This deck is already great, and I think over the course of the Fantastic Four First Step season, it is only going to improve. This is the list, and yes, that is an America Chavez you see in it. Now, this is already a good deck. I had an 18-8 win rate at the top end of Infinite with it to close out last season. It is currently the first day of the new season. Mr. Fantastic First Steps is out and is a very interesting card in this deck. Herbie is out and might be a very interesting card in this deck. And of course, the Human Torch comes out next week and will definitely be a very interesting card in this deck. So, with all of that said, this deck is already elite and might legitimately get better. But what's it actually trying to do? Well, bluntly, this is a deck that is sort of an evolution of the Shamo-style points and tech deck that has evolved to be much heavier on the points while still maintaining the tech to prevent you from getting absolutely blown out by various combo decks. Having ShangChi and Enchantress in your Brood deck is typically not something that often happens, in large part because Brood decks typically involve a lot of 3s, and it can be very difficult to actually cast a 4. What has changed about this is not necessarily the cat Zaboo, but the combination of Zaboo and Surge. This has allowed final turn Shang Enchantress to be much more common, but crucially also much more easily able to be blended with whatever else it is that you're doing. This is a crucial thing to understand about this deck. What it's built to do is optimize its point output per energy while still not giving up the tech. This is a deck that could be thought about as Sarah-less Sarah. It could be thought about as a lot of things. But what it's trying to do fundamentally is output more points than all of those decks while still maintaining the advantages that it has. Being a better point output deck and doing so in a way that is mostly invulnerable to your opposing ShangChis and Enchantresses, that you are able to then dominate those matchups against the full tech decks because you are better at points and neither of you have functional tech, and in turn, be a good tech deck against the decks that are going over the top of you. In other words, this deck is currently hitting the sweet spot, and there are probably 2, maybe 3 cards coming out this season that might make it even better. If you're a certain type of Marvel Snap boomer, you might remember when America Chavez was in every deck. That was when she was a 6 cost and had totally different text. Since that text change, she has not been in anything. But this deck plays enough stuff in terms of payoff, and there are few enough 1-drops that it would want to play that it ends up being a legitimate contender. You remember when I talked about how Clea was just sort of naturally going to have spots in buff decks as long as people were willing to do that because her competition at the 1-drop slot was just so minimal? You're looking at mostly Hydra Bob type stuff where it's like, okay, there's really not a lot of competition. Zaboo is already in the deck, so that's kind of a given. What is the other 1-drop that we're actually playing? And I think America Chavez is a great example of this dynamic in action. It's the same thing that makes Clea sort of functional there. It's the same thing that made Electra functional in the Electra decks we've done the video on. It's just a lack of competition, and this is a good enough card that you're totally fine with it. Zaboo is an obviously extremely powerful card. You want to discount your 4s. We've talked about the power of discounting Shang and Enchantress in a deck like this in such a way that it allows you to also play them alongside big points Broods, for example. But I do think that it's also worth talking about the ways in which you discount Gwenpool and Galacta. Playing those early is obviously incredible. You might not think that it's the greatest thing on earth to get a Gwenpool down early. It is. That is just a card that you are always going to want to play. Getting it down early can be very valuable. You do have some considerations, like, do I want to wait and see if I draw better hits for this Gwenpool? Because you definitely have some real force multipliers in here. But a lot of the time, what Zaboo does is not just make your deck stronger, but make it easier to play, because some of your 3s don't really want to be played on 3. You don't want to be playing a Brood on 3. You really want to be playing anything but a Brood on 3. But you also don't want to skip turn 3. So what Zaboo does is allow you to have these 3s that you want to play later in the game, because they're not always going to cost 3. Or, to be clear, you're going to be able to prioritize other things over them early in the game without skipping your turn 3. We have a lot of buffers in here: Gwenpool, Galacta, Mr. Sinister, America Chavez, and Surge. All of them are good enough as is. We can see that from the ways in which they're played in all sorts of decks that do not have things that carry buffs well. They are much better when their impact is effectively doubled. That is what Mr. Sinister is doing. He is your buff carrier. Surge is a combination of a buffer and Zaboo, basically the perfect card for a deck like this. It's really hard to overstate just how good she is in this kind of context. Plenty of decks are playing her, and I think this is sort of key to understanding why the deck is good. There's a lot of decks that are playing Zaboo, Surge, Galacta, Gwenpool, ShangChi. This deck is the best at using the buffs from Zaboo, Surge, Galacta, Gwenpool because of stuff like Mr. Sinister and Brood. Merlin is kinda just here. He's just good enough. The reason I like him is mostly that he sort of bails you out of a lot of awkward situations. I think of him sort of like I thought of 3/5 Nocturne, where it's like, that's really what this card is basically doing, is it's just letting you get bailed out by being incredibly flexible and not being an active detriment while being incredibly flexible. So it's not like Merlin is required so much for a lot of this stuff. It's just that he's always gonna be in these decks because he's like Scarlet Witch Plus. He does a bunch of unique stuff. If you brood and you don't have buffs on them, he turns them into 4s. There's just a bunch of little things that he is capable of doing that a lot of other cards do not have the ability to do. And all of those little things add up into an eminently playable card who probably isn't busted, but just his constant playability. And I think the fact that he is location control, I personally find like that to be the most offensive part of his. And just a little quick aside here, having free location control is, I think, actually a bad thing for the game long term because it disproportionately benefits players who know how to do that better. So like the better you are at using him, the better he is for. And I think Nocturne had a lot of that similar stuff where like the RNG in Marvel Snap is largely located in locations, and the less RNG there is, the more flat the curve is. And I think that RNG is important in card games because you need ability for a worse player to beat a better player, and you need it to be a fairly common thing. And so cards that explicitly mitigate the RNG in Snap, like this and like Nocturne, I think should not be this aggressively costed. Yes, that is an Okoye you see. Okoye is in this list as a almost, here's the thing. I want to say, oh yeah, you just take her out and you put Mr. Fantastic in and it's going to be awesome. But like, she was actually pretty good here. Like, again, this is sort of an issue of lack of competition, right? There's just not many cards in the niche of 2-drop and buffer. And now Mr. Fantastic probably does honestly replace her. But she has actually been fairly impressive for me as long as the cards in your deck are being drawn at some point. And Merlin can mess this up by like overfilling your hand and maybe they aren't a lot of great targets left in your deck. But I think one of the things Surge has taught me is like, yes, the energy discount is important, but so is just points. Remember, the ethos of this deck is to be a Zaboo, Galacta, Surge, Gwenpool deck, but better at carrying those buffs and not giving up the ShangChi stuff. Brood is a big part of why you are better at carrying those buffs. You get a Gwenpool buff on it. That's 3 4s. You get a Galacta buff on it. That's 3 6s. You get no buffs on it. You can still polymorph the 3s up to 4s with Merlin. That also works as a sort of backwards way of getting extra points out of this guy. Definitely the kind of card you can cut, I think, even right now for Sebastian Shaw or for Mr. Fantastic First Steps or for really whatever it is you want to do. Fastos is the worst of the buffers in this deck. Yes, worse than America Chavez, probably just because there needs to be a 1 in this deck at some point. And yes, also probably worse than Okoye. I know, I wouldn't have believed it either. I got a lot of good feedback on my last video where I talked about the phrase Shang Bang. And, I guess I'll just say it again. It seemed like it worked last time, so here you go. This guy's here to Shang Bang people. They play stuff. It's big. You don't want them to do that. You blow up their stuff. Limited in scope to ongoing cards only, Enchantress is compensated for this with a better body than ShangChi, and that is usually enough for her to make it into these decks, despite the fact that even though she's not going to have a lot of targets, basically. If you hit a Zaboo on her, this is a 3-6, you're basically fine with that. If you hit a Zaboo and a Surge on her, it's a 2-7, you're basically fine with that. Like, she's not anything special, but her downside is good enough that you're very happy to have her in the deck regardless. Hard to be a buff deck without Galacta. This is still one of the better cards in the game, even after her nerf. Her power is immediately lessened in a deck like this. This was previously the best way to get a +3 buff onto stuff. It is no longer that. She is definitely in a worse spot, but she is still good enough in large part because of the package of cards that she's in, the Zaboo, the Surge, accelerating her out early. The earlier you get her out there, the more points she is. Being able to have multiple ways to accelerate her out is part of why this package is so powerful. She is still good in this context, even though she is sort of less good overall. I think if you ask me who the star of this season was, you could very easily say it was Gwenpool. A lot of people might say Merlin, but I feel like last season was the Gwenpool season. She was in so many of my decks. She was in more decks of mine than Galacta. She was in every single little good cards deck. She was just doing. And I think that she deserves her flower. So, full disclosure, this video is probably coming out a bit late. And the reason for that is I spent like 20 minutes just trying to record a Fantasticar video before eventually finding myself just disappointed with what it was that I had to say. So I'll give you a little bit of a TLDR of where my head is at on Fantasticar, on all of that stuff. I might do a longer video once feel like I'm able to like formulate a thought and look at it and be like, yeah, I think I'm accurately conveying myself. I don't love that Fantasticar exists. I don't think it's a particularly good card. I don't like the precedent that it sets. And I think that my attitude of it's in the game, you have to play it. I plan on probably continuing to think about things like that, but I do think that I have to interrogate that attitude a little bit further. I think it's a notable difference in attitudes between people who game communities and people who come game communities. I think if you went to a pro said, oh, I'm playing this because I don't own, whatever, people would look at you and they'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? Whereas if you played a tournament in Marvel Snap and you're like, oh, I just don't own this, I think that's like a much more common thing. And I think people would be like much more sympathetic to it. And so I guess what I'm trying to do is interrogate some of my sort of early beliefs stuff. We'll see where I end up. But TLDR, I probably want to try to talk maybe a little bit more about budget replacements or like explicitly budget decks, maybe at the end of my tier lists, things like that. That's sort of where my head is at, what I think I might want to be doing. You'll notice I talk about cards a lot of the time and say, like, this is one of the cards that's the most deck, but I don't necessarily offer replacements it. And I did try to do that, like in this video, when we talked about Fastos, like this is replaceable, yeah. And we talked about Okoye, this is replaceable, yeah. Is there something more explicit you guys would want me to do? I'm actually kind of interested to see what you have as feedback. As always, I've been KMBest, you've been phenomenal. We're going to jump into the gameplay now, and I'll see you in the next one. I'm a creative person. Red Guardian or Copycat over Fastos? Really like whichever one of those you feel like you want to be I'm going for this. I don't really care about card draw. I do care deeply about buffs early. I care deeply about a turn. Style rap 4 bars about a card or that feels a bit crazy. Feels like a likely I will not do that. If I play this, This, yeah. Make sure we don't get debacked and try to win a tiebreaker. Deback for sure not happening. I don't know that we can win a tiebreaker. Like, it's possible that that thing under there is a hazmat and we just get shit on. But it's possible also that we can win a breaker here. Yes, see, there we go. Like, there were worlds where we got fucked to death, but like, if we were sitting there worried about the potential for the Annihilus the whole time, it had to be exactly Annihilus then and Infinite previously, right? It had to be very specifically Annihilus that you top decked and Infinite that you didn't top deck. They're so cool, holy shit. Yeah, this is dominating. I think this is super fucked up. What a girl. We'll find out if this was actually dominating or not. Looking like a very strong yes. Hey, get your hand off those cards. Get your hand off those cards. Looking like a strong yes. Get your hand off the... Oh my god. You're so rude today. Annual reward idea, hot take. Josh, I mean, you were literally here when we were playing. I don't really know that you did know what my plays were. You knew what my plays were in my deck. Yes, but also, like, what's the deal? Okay to be a Josher. I don't know what the fuck this means. But it's fucking hilarious if I get double fat. Canceled? No, I'm trying to actually have a conversation with Got me, dude. Are we dead? I get shanged and die or something? Oh. Tiebreaker win? Maybe? On the fact that Gwenpool is bigger than Red Hulk, unironically? Look at that. Not even a tiebreaker win. Gwenpool is just unironically bigger than Red Hulk. I have Chavez, Okoye, Fastos. I'm not leaving. Why would you give me that? The other one is a death, yeah? Yep. Kind of just had to cover all of this. My thought process was there's nothing in the deck that wins mid. Damn. Gonna give me the Sam and the shield? Now I'm perturbed. Holy fuck. I mean, that's beast mode. Love it. I hope I did my math right. I'm pretty sure I beat a Dr. Doom here, though. They go to 5, right? Plus 5 on a Doom? Yep. 13 to 14. Pretty sure I did my math right on that, but it's always one of those things where you're just like, wow, I really fucking hope I didn't absolutely blow it. I mean, I get why they stayed, right? They had the Doom.